The Valerian ambassador's bioluminescent crests pulsed with what Captain Sarah Chen recognized as barely concealed amusement. Standing in the massive hangar of Lunar Base Alpha, she maintained her professional demeanor despite the patronizing atmosphere that filled the space like a thick fog. Behind her, her carefully selected crew of primitive humans waited with equally practiced patience. As promised in the Integration Treaty, Ambassador First Light of Dawn announced, their translucent appendages rippling, "We present humanity with its first true interstellar vessel." The ambassador's vocal harmonics carried that particular tone Chen had come to associate with adults speaking to very small children. The massive hangar doors began to part with deliberate slowness. In the growing gap, a ship unlike anything humanity had ever seen gradually revealed itself. It wasn't the sleek, crystalline design of standard Valerian vessels, nor did it match the robust engineering aesthetics of Earth's own space fleet. Instead, it looked like something out of a fever dream, a twisted amalgamation of geometric shapes that seemed to actively deny conventional physics. "We call it the hypothesis," First Light of Dawn continued. "It is unique among our experimental vessels. We believe it will be perfectly suited to humanity's current level of development." Dr. Marcus Wong, Chen's chief scientist, adjusted his glasses and whispered, "Captain, those energy readings don't make any sense. According to these scans, the ship's drive core is simultaneously active and inactive." "Of course it doesn't make sense to you," another ambassador, Evening Chorus, chimed in with what passed for a sympathetic smile among their species. "Your species is still learning to crawl among the stars. This vessel will help you take your first steps." Chen felt her jaw tighten, but kept her diplomatic smile firmly in place. 6 months of first contact proceedings had taught her that the Valerians' condescension wasn't intentionally malicious. They genuinely couldn't conceive of other species as equals until they had proven themselves over centuries of development. Lieutenant James O'Connor, her tactical officer, shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "Granted, but keep it subtle," Chen murmured. "They're giving us their equivalent of a child's chemistry set, aren't they?" "That's my red too, Lieutenant." The hypothesis hung before them, its hull seeming to shift colors depending on the angle of observation. Protrusions that might have been sensor arrays or weapon systems jutted out at impossible angles, and sections of the hull appeared to fade in and out of visibility. "The vessel responds to conscious intention," First Light of Dawn explained. "Our more advanced ships utilize pure quantum manipulation, of course, but we found that developing species often benefit from this more intuitive interface." Dr. Wong's handheld scanner suddenly sparked and shut down. He shook it in frustration. "Captain, this thing is actively refusing to be measured. It's like it's laughing at our instruments." "We've included a comprehensive manual," Evening Chorus added, producing a crystalline data cube. "Simplified, of course, for your current technological understanding." Chen accepted the cube with a gracious nod, even as she noticed the patronizing notes in its projected index. Chapter 1. Basic Concepts for Developing Minds, and Warning. Do not attempt advanced maneuvers until basic reality comprehension is achieved. Your species shows potential, First Light of Dawn said, their crest flickering with what might have been genuine encouragement. While your understanding of universal principles remains charmingly primitive, your capacity for irregular thinking patterns could prove interesting. As the ambassadors prepared to leave, Evening Chorus turned back. "Oh, and do try not to accidentally erase yourselves from existence. The paperwork is quite tedious." After the Valerian delegation departed, Chen gathered her crew near the base of the hypothesis. The ship's surface rippled like water when Chief Engineer Maya Rodriguez attempted to take a sample reading. "Orders, Captain?" O'Connor asked, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm, as if the ship might suddenly attack. Chen studied the vessel thoughtfully. "Dr. Wong, what's your initial assessment? It's either the most advanced piece of technology I've ever seen, or it's held together by dreams and duct tape, possibly both." He paused. frowning at his rebuilt scanner. The power source appears to be, well, the closest analogy would be a perpetual motion machine powered by impossibility. Rodriguez kicked the hull gently, producing a sound like wind chimes. They gave us their equivalent of a broken prototype because they think we're too stupid to handle their real tech. No, Chen said slowly, a smile spreading across her face. They gave us exactly what we needed. A ship that breaks all the rules they think they understand. She turned to face her crew. The Valerians operate on pure logic and established universal laws. But they just handed us a vessel that responds to human consciousness and imagination. You're saying we can make it do whatever we think it can do? O'Connor asked, his eyes widening with understanding. Within reason, Wong cautioned. The manual probably contains actual limitations we should. He stopped as the data cube projected a warning label. Caution. Primitive species tend to ignore safety protocols. Well, Chen said, they're not wrong about that. She straightened her uniform and addressed her crew formally. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been given humanity's first real chance to show the galaxy what we can do. The Valerians think they've handed us a toy. Let's show them why they should have given us an instruction manual for their entire civilization instead. Rodriguez grinned. Permission to start taking this thing apart to see how it doesn't work. Granted. Dr. Wong, start analyzing that manual. Focus on what they're specifically telling us not to do. O'Connor, begin crew selection for our first test flight. I want people who can think outside not just the box, but outside the entire concept of boxes. As her crew dispersed to their tasks, Chen looked up at the hypothesis. Its hull now seemed to shimmer with anticipation, as if it too was eager to discover what humans might accomplish with a ship that bent reality to imagination. They think they've given us training wheels, she murmured to herself. Let's show them why humanity never needed them in the first place. The hypothesis's surface rippled in response, and for a moment, Chen could have sworn she heard it laugh. The hypothesis hung in lunar orbit, defying every known law of physics, while Chief Engineer Rodriguez dangled upside down in what she insisted was the engine room. After 3 weeks of preparation, they were about to attempt their first real flight. I think I figured out the problem, Rodriguez called out, her voice echoing strangely through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was looking. We've been trying to understand how it works. That's exactly what we shouldn't do. Captain Chen floated nearby, watching as the engineer deliberately closed her eyes and reached into what appeared to be solid metal. Her hand passed through effortlessly. Explain. The Valerians built this ship to respond to consciousness, right? But they're logical to a fault. They assume consciousness follows rigid patterns. Rodriguez pulled her hand back, now holding what looked like a glowing crystal. They never considered what would happen if you just decided physics was more of a suggestion. Dr. Wong's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain, you need to see this. The manual's appendix just rewrote itself. In the control room, or what they'd collectively agreed to call the control room, since the ship seemed to change its internal layout based on their expectations, Wong had the crystalline data cube projected across an impossible space. Warning messages flashed in multiple dimensions. Coaxitin. DDTC sticky irregular thoj pei tirans. Safety puertos in Beijing. They built in safeguards, Wong explained, adjusting his glasses. But here's the interesting part. The safeguards are based on their understanding of how consciousness should work. They never accounted for human creativity. Chen finished. O'Connor's status. The tactical officer looked up from his station, which had taken the form of a vintage arcade cabinet, because he'd once joked that flying an impossible ship should at least be fun. All systems are. Well, they're doing something. Could be nominal. Could be planning to turn us all into quantum poetry. Good enough. Chen settled into the captain's chair, which had finally stopped trying to optimize itself into higher dimensions. Rodriguez, get up here. Let's show the galaxy what happens when you give humans a ship that runs on imagination. The first test was supposed to be simple, a quick jump to Mars and back. Of course, humanity had been defying expectations since they first crawled out of the ocean, and decided walking upright seemed like an interesting challenge. Transit calculated, O'Connor announced. Though I should mention the navigation computer is currently insisting that Mars is simultaneously where we left it, and also in 7 other locations. Pick the one that feels right, Chen ordered. That's not how space navigation works, Wong protested weakly. It is now. Rodriguez grinned from her station, where she'd managed to convince the ship's engineering controls to manifest as a complex series of finger paintings. Captain, permission to try something crazy. Granted, but try to keep us in the same dimension. The paperwork for trans-dimensional incidents is murder. Rodriguez closed her eyes and placed her hands on the controls. The Valerians think in straight lines. Their ships travel through space like it's a highway. But what if we? She paused, her face scrunching in concentration. What if we just convinced space that Mars was actually right next door? Warning messages erupted across every surface. ERROR. Spatial mechanics violation. Warning. CAUSSALITY No tut IC. Please stop. The ship shuddered, caught between its programming and the sheer audacity of human imagination. For a moment, reality seemed to hold its breath. Then Rodriguez smiled. Hey, space. Be a pal. The universe blinked. Mars filled their view screen exactly where it was supposed to be, despite the fact they hadn't actually moved. Or rather, they had moved, but they'd convinced space itself that the distance between points A and B was more of a polite suggestion than a physical constant. Holy shit, O'Connor whispered. Did we just fold space with a pun? Wong was frantically checking readings that seemed to be written in interpretive dance. This is impossible. We didn't navigate to Mars. We just redefined its location in relation to us. The Valerians gave us a ship that responds to consciousness, Chen mused, but they never considered that human consciousness doesn't play by their rules. We don't just think outside the box. We reimagine the fundamental nature of boxes. The ship's systems had stopped protesting, and now seemed to be humming thoughtfully, like a teacher whose students had just solved a problem in an unexpected but brilliant way. Captain, Rodriguez called out, the engine configuration is evolving. It's like the ship is learning from us, adapting to how we think instead of trying to make us think like Valerians. Chen smiled. Send a message to Lunar Command. Tell them the test was successful, but don't explain how. Let's see how long it takes the Valerians to realize they didn't give us training wheels. They gave us a blank canvas. Message sent. O'Connor confirmed. Though you should know the quantum communications array is now insisting on transmitting an interpretive dance, as long as it gets the message across. Chen leaned back in her chair, watching as her crew began to explore the true potential of their impossible ship. Rodriguez, how many other laws of physics do you think we can politely disagree with? All of them, Captain. The manual's full of warnings about what we shouldn't try. I say we treat it like a to-do list. Warning messages continued to flash, but they seemed less urgent now, more like helpful suggestions from an increasingly bemused operating system. Note IC. Reality, Ture Dichi Hiona Iloi Par if Fers Common Stancy. Sugg Istian. Perhaps Suen Sidr Fo Eloing some Woriolis. Observation. Oh, you are just going to keep doing this. ARENTU. The hypothesis hung in space, its hull now rippling with possibilities as humanity began to teach it new ways to dream. Somewhere in the vast darkness between worlds, the very fabric of reality was beginning to realize it might need to update its own user manual. When the Drachnid invasion force appeared at the edge of the Sol system, the Valerian defense fleet responded with their usual methodical precision. Their crystalline ships formed perfect geometric patterns, their quantum weapons ready to fire with mathematical certainty. The Drachnids, massive beings whose biotechnology ships looked like deep-sea creatures crossed with nightmares, didn't follow the expected tactical protocols. They simply tore through the Valerian formations like tissue paper. Fascinating, Dr. Wong commented from his station aboard the Hypothesis, which was currently hiding behind Saturn's rings, because Rodriguez had convinced the ship that rings made excellent camouflage. The Drachnids are using biological ships that operate on pure instinct. The Valerians' logical tactics are useless against an enemy that doesn't play by their rules. Captain Chen watched the battle unfold with growing concern. Just like they couldn't predict how we would use their gift ship. Exactly, Wong agreed. But unlike us, the Drachnids aren't interested in peaceful coexistence. Their ships are literally eating the Valerian vessels. O'Connor's arcade cabinet battle station chimed ominously. Captain, we're receiving a distress call from the Valerian flagship. Their admiral is requesting our assistance. He paused. I think it physically hurt them to ask. Chen smiled grimly. Rodriguez, is our ship still insisting it can taste colors? Yes, Captain. It's also developed strong opinions about jazz. Perfect. All hands, battle stations, however you choose to interpret that concept. The Hypothesis emerged from Saturn's rings, its hull now somehow performing an abstract interpretation of John Coltrane's Giant Steps. The Drachnid fleet, 50 ships strong, turned their collective attention to this new arrival. They're scanning us, Wong reported. And now they're scanning us again because they don't believe the first readings. Can you blame them? Rodriguez asked. She had reconfigured her engineering station into a set of wind chimes that somehow controlled the ship's reality-bending drive. We barely believe our own readings most days. The Drachnid flagship, a massive creature vessel that resembled a prehistoric shark crossed with a cathedral, opened a communication channel. The alien commander's voice rumbled like an earthquake having an existential crisis. What hate are you? Chen straightened in her chair. We're humanity's first interstellar vessel. The Valerians gave us their worst ship because they thought we couldn't handle their best. She paused for effect. Would you like to see what we did with it? Your vessel defies classification. Our weapons canotlock unto something that refuses to exist coincides TNT. Oh, it gets better, Rodriguez called out. Captain, remember how we discovered that reality gets really confused if we start humming old TV theme songs while manipulating the quantum drive? Chen's smile widened. All hands, if you know the theme to the A-Team, now would be a perfect time to demonstrate. The Hypothesis atoll began to vibrate as the crew hummed in unison. Reality, which had been doing its best to accommodate human creativity up to this point, threw up its metaphorical hands in surrender. The Drachnid fleet fired their weapons, biological projectiles that could tear through conventional matter like wet paper. The Hypothesis responded by convincing physics that it was actually Tuesday next week, and wouldn't all those weapons feel silly for jumping the gun? They're charging for another attack, O'Connor reported cheerfully. Should I show them what happens when you cross quantum uncertainly with a knock-knock joke? Save that for emergencies, Chen ordered. Rodriguez, remember that modification you made where we can convince other ships that they're actually elaborate performance art? Ready when you are, Captain. I've got the ship primed to redefine their existence as interpretive dance. The Drachnid commander's voice boomed again. This is impossible. That's the idea, Chen replied. Rodriguez, make them question their life choices. The engineer's wind chimes sang, and suddenly half the Drachnid fleet found themselves transformed into an avant-garde installation piece about the futility of cosmic aggression. The biological ships, their very nature rebelling against this forced metaphysical reinterpretation, began to retreat. What have you done? The Drachnid commander demanded. We took a ship designed to teach basic spaceflight to primitives and turned it into a device that runs on pure human audacity, Chen explained. Would you like to see what happens when we start quoting Douglas Adams? The remaining Drachnid ships began to withdraw, their formations breaking down as each captain individually decided that some battles weren't worth the existential crisis. From the Valerian flagship, Admiral Morningstar's voice crackled through the comm. This is not how this ship was meant to be used. With all due respect, Admiral, Chen replied, you gave us a ship that runs on consciousness and imagination, then acted surprised when we imagined better ways to use it. Rodriguez, show them our new trick with quantum harmonics and classic rock. The hypothesis's hull began playing Queen's Don't Stop Me Now through vibrations in space-time itself. The retreating Drachnid ships accelerated, clearly deciding that whatever humanity was, it was best observed from a very safe distance. Impossible, Admiral Morningstar whispered. No, Chen corrected. Human. There's a difference. We don't see impossible as a barrier. We see it as a challenge to our creativity. You gave us a ship that bends reality, but you never stopped to ask what would happen when reality met human imagination. As the last Drachnid ship vanished into faster-than-light travel, Rodriguez called out, Captain, the ship wants to know if we can teach it more Earth music. It's developed a particular interest in jazz fusion. Why not? Chen settled back in her chair, watching the Valerian fleet attempt to reorganize itself while simultaneously trying to process what they'd just witnessed. After all, if you're going to bend reality, you might as well give it a good soundtrack. The hypothesis hummed contentedly, its impossible systems now running on a combination of quantum mechanics, human determination, and what appeared to be an emerging appreciation for Miles Davis. The Valerian High Council chamber hummed with agitation as Captain Chen presented her crew's latest findings. The crystalline walls pulsed with colors that suggested their hosts were experiencing something between awe and indigestion. So you're telling us, First Speaker Dawn Echo's voice wavered, that you've taught the hypothesis to rewrite quantum mechanics through interpretive dance. Not exactly, Dr. Wong adjusted his glasses. We've simply helped it understand that quantum mechanics is more of a collaborative art form than a rigid set of rules. Rodriguez, who had refused to leave her wind chime control interface behind even for this formal meeting, added, the ship's gotten really good at jazz improvisation. Turns out, reality is much more flexible when you treat universal constants as suggestions. The council chambers erupted in a cascade of crystalline chimes, the Valerian equivalent of collective apoplexy. Morningstar, recently promoted for surviving unprecedented irregularities in spacetime, attempted to restore order. This goes against everything we understand about the universe, they protested. That's because you're trying to understand the universe, Chen explained. We're having a conversation with it. On cue, the hypothesis, parked in orbit above, began transmitting back staccata and fugue in D minor through fluctuations in the planetary gravity field. The Valerian city's architectural crystals harmonized unexpectedly, creating an impromptu concert hall out of the entire atmosphere. Stop that, Dawn Echo commanded. We would, O'Connor said from his position by the door, where he'd set up his arcade cabinet interface, but the ships developed a flair for dramatic timing. Wong pulled up a holographic display of their latest discoveries. We found that reality isn't as rigid as previously thought. It's more collaborative. The universe doesn't just operate on mathematical principles. It responds to creativity, to intention, to the sheer audacity of asking why not. The display showed their recent experiments, stars that had been temporarily convinced to dance a waltz, a black hole that had been persuaded to turn itself inside out because Rodriguez had wondered aloud if it could, and a particularly memorable incident where they'd accidentally turned a meteor shower into a percussion section. This is dangerous, one council member warned. You're undermining the fundamental structure of space-time. Actually, Rodriguez corrected, we're teaching it new ways to express itself. Did you know that quantum entanglement really enjoys Mozart? The ship chose that moment to demonstrate, entangling the quantum states of every crystal in the chamber into a perfect harmonic resonance. The resulting chord contained mathematical proofs that simultaneously validated and disproved string theory. The universe, Chen continued, isn't a set of unchangeable laws. It's an ongoing dialogue between reality and consciousness. You've been treating it like a textbook when it's really more of a jam session. But, Dawn Echo's crystalline form flickered in distress. How can you navigate space if you don't follow proper protocols? Wang smiled. We found that if you ask nicely and come up with an interesting enough reason, space is actually quite flexible about where it puts things. As if to demonstrate, the hypothesis briefly convinced the local stellar neighborhood that all points in space were actually the same point, but only on alternate Tuesdays, and only if you brought snacks. This is chaos, Morningstar declared. This is evolution, Chen corrected. The ship you gave us wasn't just a vessel. It was a bridge between different ways of thinking. You approach the universe through pure logic. We approach it through imagination. Together, we're discovering that reality itself enjoys a little creativity. Rodriguez's wind chimes tinkled softly, and suddenly the council chamber was filled with a visualization of quantum probability waves performing an elaborate ballet. The ship's not just learning from us anymore, she explained. It's teaching us too. Turns out, the laws of physics love to dance. They were just waiting for someone to play the right music. The council sat in stunned silence as reality itself seemed to hum in agreement. Outside, stars twinkled in harmony with the quantum fluctuations of human consciousness meeting universal constants in an endless, beautiful improvisation. We've been thinking too small, Chen concluded. You gave us what you thought was a simple training vessel, but you actually gave us the key to understanding that the universe isn't a machine to be operated. It's a partner to be danced with. The hypothesis, still in orbit, began playing a complex fusion of Bach and quantum harmonics that made several nearby moons briefly question their orbital mechanics. The universe, it seemed, had developed a taste for human creativity, and it was eager for an encore. Dawn Echo's crystalline form vibrated with what might have been resignation or dawning understanding. And what happens now? Chen smiled. Now we teach the cosmos how to swing. When the Drachnids returned, they brought a fleet of 10,000 bioships. When the Valerians saw them coming, they called for evacuation. But when humanity saw them, Captain Chen just smiled and asked Rodriguez to put on some Miles Davis. Are you sure about this? Admiral Morningstar's hologram flickered in the hypothesis's control room, which had recently rearranged itself into something resembling a jazz club complete with quantum probability clouds serving as mood lighting. Admiral, Chen replied, settling into her captain's chair, now styled like a vintage piano bench. Have you ever wondered why we named our ship the Hypothesis? Because that was its designation in our experimental. Because, Rodriguez interrupted, her wind chimes dancing. A hypothesis is just a question waiting to be tested. And we got some really interesting questions for reality today. The Drachnid armada filled the view screen, their biological ships writhing in patterns that defied conventional geometry. Their commander's voice boomed through space itself. Surrender or be devoured. Actually, Chen said, we were thinking of trying something new. Dr. Wang, would you explain our latest theory? Wang adjusted his glasses with a grin. We've discovered that reality isn't just responsive to consciousness. It's got a sense of humor. And today, we're going to tell it the ultimate joke. O'Connor's arcade cabinet chimed in agreement as he reported. Drachnid fleet is charging weapons. All 10,000 ships are preparing to fire. Perfect. Chen nodded to Rodriguez. Ready for the greatest improvisation in human history. The engineer's wind chimes began a complex melody that somehow made parallel lines meet. The ship's been practicing this one, Captain. It's composed a little number called Schrodinger's Jazz. Hit it. The hypothesis began to play. Not just with sound, but with reality itself. Each note bent probability in new ways. Each chord rearranged quantum states like musical phrases. The ship had learned from humanity's creativity, and now it was ready for its masterpiece. The Drachnid weapons fired, and found themselves part of an elaborate cosmic percussion section. Their bioships, designed to consume matter and energy, suddenly discovered they had been recruited as unwitting participants in the universe's first quantum orchestra. "What is TES?" the Drachnid commander demanded. "This," Chen answered, "is what happens when you give humans a ship that runs on imagination. Then tell them there are rules they can't break. We don't just think outside the box. We convinced the box it was actually a symphony." The hypothesis performance reached a crescendo. Reality, which had grown quite fond of human creativity, decided to join in the fun. Space-time itself began to swing. 10,000 Drachnid ships found themselves simultaneously existing in every possible state of retreat, advance, and surprisingly good tap dance. Their biological weapons transformed into elaborate solos about the futility of cosmic warfare. The very fabric of space began humming Take 5 in perfect quantum harmony. From their flagship, the Drachnid commander watched in horror as their fearsome armada became an interpretive dance piece about peace through music. "This defies all natural law." "Natural law," Wang commented, checking readings that had arranged themselves into musical notation. "Just joined our band." The Valerian fleet, hanging back at a safe distance, watched in stunned silence as humanity turned the greatest space battle in history into the universe's first quantum jazz festival. Admiral Morningstar's crystalline form vibrated with what might have been awe or hysterical laughter. "And now," Chen announced, "for our final." Rodriguez's wind chimes sang a phrase that made causality itself tap its foot. The hypothesis, now fully in tune with both human creativity and universal consciousness, performed its masterpiece, a reality-bending symphony that convinced all 10,000 Drachnid ships they had always been more interested in musical theory than conquest. The massive bioships, their very nature transformed by the power of human imagination and universal harmony, began to retreat, but not before joining in a galaxy-spanning rendition of "What a Wonderful World." As the last echoes of their improvised victory faded, Admiral Morningstar finally found their voice. "You turned the most dangerous armada in known space into a jazz ensemble." "No," Chen corrected, "we showed them. And you. What happens when you stop treating the universe like a machine and start treating it like a dance partner? The ship you gave us wasn't a teaching tool for primitives. It was a key to understanding that reality itself has been waiting for someone to ask it to dance." The hypothesis hummed contentedly, its impossible systems now running on a perfect fusion of quantum mechanics, human creativity, and what had become a genuine appreciation for improvisational art. Reality, it seemed, had developed a taste for human imagination, and the universe would never be quite the same. "So," Rodriguez asked, her wind chimes playing a questioning melody, "what should we do for an encore?" Chen smiled as she watched the Drachnid fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel, their ships still humming jazz standards. "I think it's time we taught the cosmos how to really swing." In the vast darkness between stars, reality itself seemed to smile. The universe had found its rhythm, and humanity was just getting warmed up for the next number. The Valerians had meant to give humans training wheels. Instead, they had given them a stage. And as the hypothesis prepared for its next performance, one thing became clear: the greatest music in the universe comes from those who aren't afraid to improvise.